They handed me a termination notice on Friday afternoon while Austin Sterling got the keys to a company Silverado, same hour, same building. I had 18 years with Sterling Automotive. He had 18 days. My name is Frank Walsh. I'm straight 47 years old, and until 3:30 last Friday, I was senior production engineer at Sterling Automotive Systems here in Detroit. I say was because everything changed when I watched them celebrate that kid's promotion in the parking lot while security waited to escort me out. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and corporate lies. 23 of us sitting there, all over 40, all being restructured out of jobs we'd held for decades. Brad Sterling stood at the head of the table in his $4,000 suit, talking about operational efficiency and competitive positioning like he was reading from a business school textbook. "Frank, you've been a valuable contributor to our team," he said, sliding the manila envelope across the mahogany table. "But Sterling is pivoting toward a more agile organizational structure. Agile, that's corporate speak for we found people half your age who'll work for half your salary." I opened the envelope, termination letter, final paycheck, severance $500 for $18. "I appreciate your understanding," Brad continued. "We're confident this transition will position Sterling for sustained growth in the evolving automotive landscape." I nodded, stood up, walked toward the door. Behind me, I could hear him already moving to the next victim. "Oh, and Frank," Brad called out, "security will assist with your transition. Standard procedure." Standard procedure, like I was some kind of security risk after 18 years of perfect attendance and zero disciplinary actions. In the hallway, I passed the break room where they'd set up a welcome celebration. Balloons, sheet cake, coffee and actual mugs instead of those styrofoam cups we'd been using since the last budget cut. All for Austin Sterling, Brad's 25-year-old nephew with the MBA from Michigan State and ideas about synergistic optimization. The kid was standing there in his pressed khakis and company polo, shaking hands with department heads, taking selfies next to a banner that read "Welcome to the Sterling team." He'd been here 18 days as a management trainee, and they were treating him like the second coming of Henry Ford. Security guard Williams walked me to my cubicle. Nice guy, former Navy. We'd talked cars and military stories during his rounds. "Sorry about this, Frank," he said quietly. "Orders from upstairs. I know Williams." "Just doing your job." I cleaned out my desk methodically, photos of my son Ethan from his high school baseball games. Technical manuals I'd collected over the years. A coffee mug Sarah had given me before the divorce, world's okayest engineer. The little desktop torque wrench I used as a paperweight, calibrated to exactly 15 foot-pounds. I adjusted the setting to maximum pressure. Old habit from my Marine days. When stress builds up, you check your equipment. Walking to the parking lot, I passed the employee bulletin board. Posted right next to the safety reminders and union meeting notices was Austin Sterling's bio sheet. Bachelor's degree in business administration. Internships at 2 different consulting firms. No actual manufacturing experience, no time on a production floor, no grease under his fingernails. But he had the right DNA. I sat in my F-150 for maybe 10 minutes, engine off, watching through the lobby windows as they took group photos with the Golden Boy. The calibration display on my torque wrench flashed red warnings, but I kept clicking the adjustment dial. Click, click, click. My phone buzzed, text from Ethan. "Dad, heard about the layoffs on the news. You okay? Smart kid. 16 years old, junior at Birmingham High, star player on the baseball team, honor roll student. Planning to study engineering at Michigan, just like his old man did 25 years ago. Before I spent 12 years in the Marines. Before I married Sarah. Before the divorce. Before Sterling Automotive became my whole life." I texted back, "Fine, home soon." But I wasn't fine. The severance wouldn't last 2 months. Unemployment benefits would cover maybe 60% of my basic expenses. I had Ethan's college fund to think about. $18,000 saved so far, nowhere near enough for in-state tuition at a decent school. Sarah and I split custody 50-50 after the divorce 4 years ago, but she made it clear that Ethan's future was on me. Fair enough. I was the engineer. I was supposed to be the practical one. I drove home to my apartment in Southfield, 1 bedroom clean, organized according to military specifications. Everything in its place. The workshop I'd set up in the garage was my real home though. Workbenches lined with precision tools. Measurement devices. Diagnostic equipment. computer workstation with CAD software I'd bought myself because Sterling's systems were 10 years behind industry standard. This was where I'd developed the thing that would change everything, though I didn't know it yet. That night, I sat in the garage recalibrating every piece of equipment I owned: torque wrenches, micrometers, digital calipers. When your world gets knocked off center, you restore what you can control. I'd been working on a production optimization algorithm since 2019. Started as a side project to solve workflow problems Sterling wouldn't invest in fixing. Spent weekends analyzing bottlenecks in our brake system assembly line. Identified 12 critical inefficiencies. Designed software solutions that could reduce manufacturing time by 40% and cut material waste by 35%. I'd shown the preliminary results to Brad once, thinking Sterling might want to pilot the system. "Interesting work, Frank," he'd said, barely glancing at the technical specifications. "But we're not positioned for major system implementations right now. Innovation has to be strategically timed, so I kept working on it, refined the algorithms, expanded the applications, filed the patent under my own name in March 2020. Used my own time, my own computer, my own garage workshop. Sterling had nothing to do with it. The patent was granted in September 2022. U.S. Patent 11,891,347. Dynamic production line optimization through predictive flow analysis. I'd put it in a filing cabinet and basically forgotten about it. Until Saturday morning when my phone rang at 8:45. "Mr. Walsh, this is Sandra Powell from Autoflow Dynamics in Cleveland. We specialize in manufacturing efficiency solutions. We've been researching production optimization technology, and we came across your patent application. We're very interested in discussing acquisition." I nearly dropped my coffee mug. "What kind of acquisition are we talking about?" "Full patent rights. We're prepared to make a substantial offer. Would $1.8 million be sufficient to begin negotiations?" The torque wrench in my hand suddenly felt weightless. $1.8 million. After 18 years of steady paychecks and incremental raises, I was looking at real money, life-changing money, Ethan's college fund money. "Are you interested in proceeding, Mr. Walsh?" My hands were shaking slightly. I adjusted my torque wrench to normal parameters, trying to process what I'd just heard. "Yes, definitely yes." We talked for another 25 minutes. Sandra explained their company's focus on manufacturing efficiency across multiple industries: automotive, aerospace, medical devices, consumer goods. My algorithm had applications far beyond Sterling's narrow brake system assembly work. "We'll send preliminary documentation to your email address," Sandra said. "Our legal team will need to verify patent ownership and conduct standard due diligence. But assuming everything checks out, we'd like to finalize this within 6 weeks." After I hung up, I just sat in my garage workshop, staring at the filing cabinet where I'd stored the patent documents. For the first time since Friday afternoon, the stress indicators in my head were reading green. I should have kept my mouth shut. Should have waited until everything was signed and sealed, but Monday morning, standing in the unemployment office parking lot, I ran into Steve Kowalski. Steve was our union rep at Sterling, 52 years old, 23 years on the job. Also got cut in Friday's restructuring. "Frank, how you holding up, brother?" Steve had always been straight with me. Former Army mechanic, 2 tours in Iraq, understood what it meant to serve something bigger than yourself. We'd worked together on safety committee issues, equipment upgrades, overtime grievance procedures. If anyone deserved to know some good news was coming, it was Steve. "Better than expected, actually. Remember that production algorithm I developed a few years back? Company in Cleveland wants to buy the patent for $1.08 million. Steve's eyes went wide. "Jesus, Frank, that's incredible. After what Sterling just did to us, you deserve every penny." We grabbed coffee at the McDonald's across the street. Talked about the layoffs, the unfairness of it all, watching guys like Austin Sterling waltz into positions they hadn't earned. Steve had 3 more years until retirement eligibility. The severance would carry him maybe 6 months if he was careful. "You know what really gets me?" Steve said, stirring his coffee with more force than necessary. "They kept the consultants. 5 McKinsey guys at $300 an hour each, telling us how to build brake systems. Meanwhile, they cut Pete Hoffman, who's been perfecting that assembly process for 20 years. Pete Hoffman. I knew Pete. Good man. Started at Sterling right out of high school in 1985. Worked his way up to senior foreman through pure expertise and dedication. Pete had developed a quality control improvement back in 2018 that reduced defect rates by 23%. Sterling implemented his system 6 months after his retirement. Never gave him a dime. This place has been screwing over good people for years. I said, yeah, well, maybe now they'll get what's coming to them. I felt good telling Steve about the patent sale. Like I'd finally won something after years of watching Sterling take advantage of people who actually knew how to build things. Big mistake. By Tuesday afternoon, word had traveled. That's how it works in a town like Detroit, where automotive people know automotive people. Somebody tells somebody who tells somebody else, and pretty soon information reaches places you never intended. My phone rang at 4:30, Brad Sterling. Frank heard an interesting rumor about some patent situation. Need to discuss this. Can you come in tomorrow at 2:50? Something in his tone made my stress indicator spike immediately. What's this about, Brad? Just some paperwork we need to review. Administrative matter. Nothing to worry about. He hung up before I could ask more questions. I spent Tuesday night going through every document I could find. Employment contract from 2005. Patent application from 2020. Patent approval from 2022. Autoflow correspondence. Everything looked clean. The algorithm was developed on my own time, using my own resources in my own garage. Sterling had nothing to do with it. Wednesday at 1:55, I walked into Sterling's main office building for the first time since Friday's layoff. The receptionist barely looked up from her computer. Williams, the security guard, nodded sympathetically, but didn't say anything. The hallways felt different now that I wasn't supposed to be there. Brad's conference room was on the 3rd floor, with windows overlooking the main production floor where I'd spent the better part of 2 decades. I could see the brake system assembly line running at about 70% efficiency. Same problems I'd identified years ago still slowing things down. Brad was there with James Crawford, Sterling's corporate lawyer. Crawford was maybe 54, expensive suit, gold watch, and the kind of confident smile that comes from winning fights against people who can't afford to fight back. Frank, appreciate you coming in, Brad said. Have a seat. Crawford slid a thick folder across the polished conference table. We've been reviewing your employment contract, specifically the intellectual property provisions on page 12, section 4. My stomach dropped about 3 floors. Any invention, improvement, or discovery made by an employee during their tenure becomes the exclusive property of Sterling Automotive Systems if it relates directly or indirectly to the company's business interests, regardless of when, where, or how it was developed. The conference room felt like it was losing oxygen. I could hear the production line humming through the windows, machinery I'd helped optimize over the years, processes I'd improved through careful analysis and gradual refinement. I developed that algorithm on my own time, I said. My own workshop, my own computer equipment. The clause doesn't specify location or resources, Mr. Walsh, Crawford replied smoothly. It specifies timing and relevance. You were employed here when you developed it. Production optimization relates directly to our core business interests. Therefore, the patent belongs to Sterling. Brad leaned forward, trying to look reasonable. Frank, we're not trying to be difficult here. We value what you've contributed over the years. We're prepared to offer you a finder's fee for bringing this opportunity to our attention. How does 15% sound? 15% of my own invention. Of 8 months of weekend work analyzing problems Sterling wouldn't invest in solving. You just laid me off with a $500 check. That was a business decision based on operational requirements, Brad said. This is separate. We're actually being quite generous. 15% of $1.8 million is $270,000. That's a substantial severance enhancement. Crawford opened another folder. If you proceed with the Autoflow sale without Sterling's authorization, we'll file for immediate injunctive relief and pursue damages for breach of contract and theft of proprietary information. Federal court litigation could take 3 years and cost several $100,000 in legal fees. I looked at both of them. Brad Sterling, whose grandfather had built this company with handshake deals and mutual respect, who'd inherited a business built by people like my father's generation. People who understood that loyalty should flow both directions. James Crawford, who'd probably never set foot on a factory floor, never worked a double shift, never missed his kid's baseball game because a production deadline couldn't wait. These were the people who'd just stolen my future. I need to think about this, I said. Of course, Brad replied. Take your time, but don't take too long. Autoflow probably has other options. I walked out of that conference room knowing I needed help. Real help. The kind that comes from people who understand how these fights actually work. That night, I called my brother Sean, detective with Detroit PD for 16 years. Former Marine, like me, Sean understood systems, procedures, and how powerful people try to intimidate regular people into giving up. "Frank, you need a specialist," Sean said after I'd explained the whole situation. "Someone who handles veteran employment rights and corporate fraud." "I know a lawyer, Carol Martinez, former Navy JAG. She helped my buddy Rodriguez when Chrysler tried to screw him over his pension. Carol's office was in downtown Detroit, converted brownstone building near the federal courthouse. She was maybe 45 sharp eyes, no-nonsense handshake. Military bearing that you recognize immediately when you've served yourself. I laid out everything. Employment contract, patent documentation, auto flow correspondence, Sterling's legal threats. She read through each page carefully, making notes on a yellow legal pad. "Mr. Walsh, this is challenging, but it's not impossible. The key question is whether your algorithm genuinely falls under Sterling's normal business scope. If we can establish sufficient differentiation from their standard operations, we might be able to challenge that IP clause. How different does it have to be? Different enough that a reasonable person wouldn't consider it part of Sterling's core competency. Tell me exactly what Sterling manufactures. Brake system components. Calipers, rotors, brake pads, some transmission housing parts, assembly work for GM and Ford suppliers. And your algorithm, production line optimization, works for any manufacturing operation. Automotive, aerospace, medical devices, food processing. The mathematical models are industry agnostic." Carol nodded, scribbling more notes that could work in our favor. "But here's what concerns me. Fighting this in federal court could take 3 years and cost $200,000 in legal fees. There's no guarantee we'd win." My hopes started deflating like a punctured tire. However, she continued, "Before we decide on litigation strategy, I need to ask something. In your 18 years at Sterling, did you ever witness questionable business practices? Anything suggesting a pattern of employee exploitation or intellectual property theft?" I thought about Pete Hoffman and his quality control system. Linda Torres, who'd identified a safety issue that could have saved Sterling millions in liability costs, only to have her report buried and her pushed into early retirement. Gary Foster, the safety inspector who documented multiple OSHA violations, transferred to night shift until he quit in frustration. "Yeah," I said. "Several cases." Carol's pen stopped moving. Would these people be willing to talk to me? Maybe. But what does this have to do with my patent? If we can establish a systematic pattern of intellectual property theft and employee exploitation, we're not just fighting a contract dispute anymore. We're looking at federal fraud violations, breach of fiduciary duty, possibly racketeering charges if the pattern is extensive enough. Over the next 2 weeks, Carol worked faster than any lawyer I'd ever heard of. She contacted Pete Hoffman, who was living on Social Security and odd jobs in Dearborn. Linda Torres, working part-time at a Home Depot in Warren. Gary Foster, who'd finally landed a safety position at Ford after 2 years of unemployment. All 3 agreed to meet with her. Their stories were remarkably similar. Loyal employees who'd developed improvements or identified problems, only to have Sterling claim ownership of their ideas while forcing them out when they became inconvenient. Carol also discovered something else. In the past 15 years, Sterling had filed 28 patents with the U.S. Patent Office. Of those, 19 listed Brad Sterling as the primary inventor. But when she cross-referenced employment records and interviewed former employees, she found that Brad had personally developed exactly 0 of them. He'd simply attached his name to other people's work. "Mr. Walsh, I think we have something much bigger than a contract dispute," Carol said during our meeting 2 weeks later. "I think we have systematic corporate fraud spanning over a decade." "What do you want to do about it?" Carol leaned forward. "I think we contact the FBI. Turns out that defrauding employees of their intellectual property is a federal crime when it involves interstate commerce. So is systematic wage theft. So is falsifying patent applications." The FBI's white-collar crime division was very interested in Sterling Automotive Systems. Meanwhile, I kept the autoflow negotiations alive, told Jennifer Martinez there were legal complications being resolved, asked if they could extend their timeline. They agreed, sensing this situation was more complex than they wanted to be involved with. Brad Sterling called me twice during this period, both times trying to sound friendly and reasonable. "Frank, hope you're considering our offer. 15% is really quite generous for a finder's fee." Still thinking it over, Brad? Well, don't think too long. Autoflow probably has other patent options. These opportunities don't wait forever. What he didn't know was that Carol had already contacted Autoflow's legal department, informing them of the ownership dispute. Sandra Powell was keeping their offer open, but they weren't making any moves until the federal investigation was resolved. On November 18th at exactly 7:30 in the morning, the FBI executed search warrants at Sterling Automotive Systems. 112 agents with boxes and computer forensics equipment. They seized servers, financial records, patent files, employment contracts, email archives, everything. Brad Sterling and James Crawford were brought to the Detroit FBI field office for questioning. Both requested lawyers immediately. The story hit the Detroit Free Press that afternoon, local automotive supplier under federal investigation for fraud. By evening, it was on the local TV news. By the next morning, it had reached the automotive trade publications. My phone rang at 6:45 the next morning. Brad Sterling, and he wasn't trying to sound friendly anymore. Frank, what the hell did you do? I talked to a lawyer, Brad. Like you suggested, this is my family's company. My grandfather built this business from nothing. You're destroying 50 years of hard work. Your grandfather treated employees like human beings. He understood that loyalty flows both directions. You treated us like disposable equipment. We can still work this out. We can negotiate a better percentage. 25%, 30% even. No, Brad, we can't. You're going to destroy 400 jobs. Is that what you want? All those families. You destroyed 400 jobs when you built a company on stolen ideas and wage theft. I'm just turning on the lights. I hung up. Over the next 4 months, the FBI investigation expanded beyond anything I'd imagined. They found evidence of $822 million in systematic wage theft through overtime violations, break time manipulation, and off-the-clock work requirements. They documented 28 cases of intellectual property theft from employees and former employees. They uncovered safety violations that had put workers at risk for years, all to avoid spending money on proper equipment and training. Most damning of all, they found email evidence that Brad Sterling and James Crawford had systematically planned the intellectual property theft, discussing which employees to target and how to structure legal language to maximize their ability to claim ownership of worker innovations. In March, Brad Sterling and James Crawford were indicted on 12 federal charges, including conspiracy to commit fraud, theft of intellectual property, violation of federal labor laws, and mail fraud. Sterling Automotive Systems filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. All assets were frozen pending the federal investigation. 340 employees lost their jobs immediately. The plant closed. The parking lot where I'd received my termination notice became empty asphalt, weeds growing through the cracks. I felt terrible about those job losses. These were good people, my former colleagues who had nothing to do with Brad's crimes, but Carol reminded me of something important. The company had been built on fraud from the beginning. It was going to collapse eventually when the legal bills caught up with them. At least now the truth was out, and justice was coming. In April, Autoflow renewed their offer for my production algorithm. $1.8 million for full patent rights plus a consulting agreement if I was interested. This time, there was no one to stop me from saying yes. I signed the papers on April 15th, after federal and state taxes, plus Carol's legal fees. I cleared $1.31 million. Real money, life-changing money. The first thing I did was set up a college fund for Ethan. $400,000 in a 529 education savings account. Michigan engineering tuition, room and board, books, everything covered with money left over for graduate school if he wanted it. When I told him, we were working on his car in my garage, teaching him how to properly calibrate a torque wrench. Dad, that's incredible. Are you serious? Dead serious. Your future is secured. Focus on your studies and baseball. Everything else is handled. Ethan looked at me with something I hadn't seen in his eyes since before the divorce. Respect. Pride. Like his old man had actually accomplished something worth celebrating. I gave my brother Sean $75,000 to help with his daughter's medical bills. She'd been fighting leukemia for 2 years, and the treatment costs were crushing their family finances despite his police insurance. Sean tried to refuse it. Frank, this is too much. Family takes care of family. Period. The money wasn't even the best part, though. The best part was what happened to my former colleagues when the class action lawsuit against Sterling's bankruptcy estate succeeded. Pete Hoffman got $850,000 in damages for his quality control system that Sterling had implemented and profited from for 5 years. Pete used the money to start a small consulting business, helping other manufacturers implement quality improvements. He hired 3 former Sterling employees. Linda Torres received $600,000 for the safety protocols Sterling had buried. She went back to school, got her master's degree in industrial safety, and landed a position with Ford's corporate safety division, making twice what Sterling ever paid her. Gary Foster got his job back at Ford plus a $300,000 settlement for wrongful termination and retaliation. He's now the senior safety inspector for their Dearborn plant, implementing the same improvements Sterling had refused to consider. Steve Kowalski found work at a General Motors supplier in Warren, making 35% more than Sterling had paid him. When he called to tell me about it, he sounded like a different person. You know what's funny, Frank? I was terrified when Sterling collapsed. Thought my career was over at 52. But this new place actually listens to experienced workers. They implement our suggestions. They share credit for improvements. They treat us like human beings instead of replaceable parts. You should have left years ago, I said. We all should have. But sometimes it takes someone willing to fight to show you that fighting is possible. And Brad Sterling, he lost everything. The company, the money, the country club membership, the big house in Birmingham. His wife divorced him 6 months after the indictment. The federal prosecutor offered him a plea deal, 5 years in minimum security prison if he testified against other companies using similar practices. He refused, went to trial, got convicted on 8 of 12 charges. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. He's currently serving his time at Milan Federal Correctional Institution, about 40 miles from the Sterling plant that used to bear his family name. I'm 47 years old now. I live in the same apartment in Southfield, but I bought the unit next door and converted it into a proper workshop. Ethan comes over every weekend, and we work on projects together. Real engineering projects, not just homework help. Teaching him about precision, measurement, quality control. Skills that matter. Last month, I started a consulting business, Walsh Production Solutions, helping small manufacturers optimize their workflows using the same algorithms Sterling tried to steal. Autoflow hired me as their lead consultant for automotive applications. I'm making more money in 6 months than Sterling paid me in 2 years. But more than that, I'm working with companies that value innovation, share credit, and treat their employees like partners instead of problems to be solved. I think about those 18 years at Sterling sometimes, all the loyalty I gave to people who saw me as disposable, all the overtime hours, missed family events, weekend emergencies that were never really emergencies, all the times I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. Carol Martinez told me something during our first meeting that I'll never forget. Frank, there's a difference between loyalty and servitude. Loyalty is mutual. Servitude is exploitation disguised as virtue. She was right. I'd spent 18 years serving people who never intended to serve me back. The missed calls from Brad Sterling started in May and continued through the summer. 47 calls in total before I finally blocked his number. He left voicemails begging me to visit him in prison, to testify as a character witness, to help him appeal his conviction. Said 18 years of working together had to count for something. I deleted every message without listening to the end, because here's what I learned from my time in the Marines and my years on the production floor. Sometimes the greatest act of loyalty is refusing to enable people who've proven they don't deserve it. Sometimes protection isn't about building walls around yourself. It's about making sure the people who come after you don't get hurt the same way. Sometimes, after 18 years of being undervalued and overlooked, the most satisfying thing isn't revenge. It's justice, and the most important thing isn't getting even. It's making sure the system that allowed the abuse gets exposed and changed. If you're reading this and you've got 15 or 20 years invested in a company that treats you like Sterling treated me, I want you to understand something. Your loyalty isn't being rewarded, it's being exploited. Your experience isn't valued, it's seen as expensive overhead. Your innovations aren't appreciated, they're opportunities for someone else to take credit and profit. You think you can't afford to fight back, but the truth is you can't afford not to. Document everything. Keep records. Know your rights. Find allies who understand that your knowledge and dedication have value beyond what shows up on a quarterly earnings report. And remember, there's a difference between building something and taking credit for what others built, between earning respect and demanding it, between loyalty and servitude. The people worth working for understand the difference. The ones who don't, they're not worth your best years.